about it? Are we ready? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 6th, 2018 Canmore Town Council meeting. According to our agenda, we have no public questions for review, and I look to administration for any changes or additions to the agenda. None? And with that, I will call the meeting to order and ask that the agenda be approved for March 6, 2018. All in favor? Thank you. The first item on the agenda is a delegation. Mr. Gareth Thomson is here this evening to make a presentation, and I invite you to come up to the microphone. We have a letter from Mr. Thomson in the agenda package that we've all read, and you will have 10 minutes to make a presentation on the information that you've provided. So welcome, Mr. Thomson.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford, members of Council. I've taken a few minutes to write down my comments just to make sure this is brief and concise for your benefit. So thank you for the chance to appear here today. I served on Canmore Town Council in the 1990s. I know firsthand how tough and complex your job is, so thanks to all of you for your hard work. As you know, late last year, I received a cease and desist or stop order telling me to end the use of my home as a tourist home, and I received a $2,500 fine violation tag in the same envelope. That stop order was triggered because my home appeared on a website that I'd actually never heard of. I called the folks on the website immediately. They removed the listing, and I was in compliance with the bylaw less than 24 hours after I received the stop order and fine in the mail. Then I paid $250 to appeal the decision to the Subdivision Development Appeal Board, the SDAB, as that was the only way to have the fine repealed according to the letter that I received from the town of Canmore. The SDAB took the position that their hands were tied on this issue, said no to my appeal, and then actually wrote a letter about this issue to you. In an unusual move, they included the following in their decision letter to me, and I quote here, "This appeal may have been avoided had there been direct contact with the owners. Issuing the stop order and violation ticket at the same time does not provide an opportunity for compliance. Because I'm a law-abiding citizen, I paid the $2,500 fine." Members of Council, I have to tell you that this action feels extremely heavy-handed on the part of the town of Canmore. Had I been given even 24 hours to bring my property into compliance with the bylaw, the appeal process would have been avoided. We would have saved the valuable time of the volunteers and councillors who sit on the SDAB, not to mention the very real cost of the half-dozen town staff who attend such meetings. So I'm here because I believe in you. I believe in Council. I believe in the honest work that you guys do. And so I wanted to appear here today to give you this feedback directly. I respectfully suggest you review the process used to enforce the bylaw governing short-term rentals. I believe there is room here for a more humane and a more compassionate approach. Just two more things. During the SDAB hearing, administration mentioned that appellants who lost their appeal can take this to the Alberta Court of Appeal. I'm here today to tell you that this is something I will not do. Being in court promotes an adversarial approach. I would rather solve this together with you, with my council. Court would also burn up more taxpayer dollars, which I'm sure you would rather put towards other more proactive projects. And speaking of which, I also prefer to spend my time in a proactive project. As you'll recall, I organized and hosted the Candidates Forum on the Environment not that long ago. I'm also working hard to improve the quality of life in this town, namely my campaigning in support of the town of Canmore and letters that Mayor Borman has written to keep bow hunters and Canmore citizens apart from each other in 4 wooded areas in the Larch Islands. So I'll do that rather than fighting in court. Last but not least, I just want to make an analogy. When commercial fishermen go out with their big drag nets, they commonly catch a lot of small fish that they didn't actually mean to catch. The term for these little fish is bycatch. And in my opinion, in this case, the town administration have done that here. They've put out this big vacation home drag net to catch those that are in contravention of our bylaw, and I support the bylaw. And they caught me. I'm an example of bycatch. I'm just like those small and I would say innocent fish in the net. And I would like to point out to you folk that by analogy, you guys are the fishermen. You're in charge of the boat. You're the skipper, and you have a choice here. You can either help that little fish by picking it up and throwing it over the side back into the ocean. We can live to swim another day, or you can just shrug your shoulders and turn aside. I would like to think, I was on council in 1992 to 1995. We still live in a town that is a small town by character and by disposition. That's why I love it here. And I would like to think that our town council can still find it in their heart to do the right thing by its citizens and be compassionate to folk like myself. I spoke to one councillor briefly about this who said, well, Gareth, I'm not sure about this. We don't want to create a precedent here. And can I just say this? That in response, I would encourage you to, in fact, create a precedent here in which you respectfully listen to folks like myself on a case-by-case basis, exercise your compassion, your sense of fairness, and consider restitution. In my case, I paid a $2,500 fine for having my place listed on a website that I'd never heard of, plus a $250 fee to appear before the SDAB, only to hear from them that their hands were tied and that they couldn't do anything for me in this case. Finding a way to be fair to people like me is exactly the sort of precedent that you should be setting in fairness to people like me who elected you and who believe in you. Happy to answer any questions you might have either now or later. Thanks again for the opportunity to appear before you, and thanks for chairing today, Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Thomson. Any questions from members of council for Mr. Thomson? Seeing none, I'd like to advise you, and thank you very much for coming today and presenting your case. I'd just like to advise you that we don't make decisions on situations like this at the same meeting, but there will be a business arising agenda item in 2 weeks on March 20th, and at that time we will let you know what will happen after that.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
So moving on through the agenda, the minutes of February 6th, 2018. Are there any errors or omissions? Council, administration? Nothing? I'd like to ask that the minutes of February 6, 2018 be approved. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the agenda, item D, business arising, nothing. Unfinished business, we don't have anything under that. And we're moving on to F, bylaw approval. Bylaw approval 2018-05, nonprofit organization 2018 property tax exemption. And here to present this evening we have Ms. Van Keimpema from our finance department. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Sanford, members of council. I'm before you this evening to present for your consideration Bylaw 2018-05, Nonprofit Organization 2018 Property Tax Exemption. Or maybe I'm not. I don't want to restart. No. Oh. There we go. Excellent. So the recommendation before you is that council give first, second, and third readings to Bylaw 2018-05, Nonprofit Organization 2018 Property Tax Exemption. So I'll give you some of the reasons behind it, some of the background. So we have a situation where the Municipal Government Act has in the midst of a change. So the legislation, the act itself has changed, but the supporting regulations have not been passed. They're in draft form. So I thought I'd do a bit of education because it's kind of moved and not moved. So the current legislation, if we look at the Municipal Government Act under Section 362, it provides automatic exemptions for certain types of property, and it depends on who owns them and how they operate them. So some of the examples are churches and schools, all the municipal property we don't tax ourselves, seniors housing, libraries, crown property, things like that are automatically exempt, and that exemption is provided for under Section 362. Also provided for under 362 is an exemption for nonprofit organizations, and then there's conditions. So the conditions are that their property has to be used for a charitable or benevolent purpose that benefits the general public. That's what the legislation says. Then one has to move on to the regulation. And the regulation, the devil's in the details, and that's in the regulation. It provides more information. So the Municipal Government Act itself has changed, but the regulation hasn't changed yet. So there's a new regulation to go with the new MGA, but it's in draft form. They're still seeking input. So we have to look to the old legislation. So for the regulation purposes. So the old regulation is COPTER, so that's a community, anyway, great big long organization, yeah. Just think of a helicopter. So it sets out in more detail about the requirements that one needs in order to qualify for exemptions. And in particular, paragraphs 10(1)A and 15(k)(I), they actually specify what they mean by general public. And in the current COPTER, general public means those in the municipality in which the property is located. So if you go back to the legislation when they talk about general public, it says that the work of the nonprofit organization has to benefit the general public of the municipality in which they're located. So that's an important thing to remember. So then subsection 16(1) sets out some conditions for exemption, and one of those conditions is that the nonprofits have to actually send in an application to give us the information so we can assess whether or not they qualify for an exemption, and they need to do so by September the 30th. Okay, so that's current legislation. So then there's been Municipal Government Act, MGA changes. So section 362, the new MGA section 362, it's been adopted, and really it's fundamentally the same, no change. Now, the new COPTER, again, those are draft, they haven't been passed. However, what it does say is planning, if it does pass for 2019, they've now divided the rules into residential and non-residential property. And I mentioned that just sort of as a seed planting, because when the regulations get passed, I'll need to come back to council and we'll work on a bylaw to set out some of the requirements. And that's when we'll talk to you more about the requirements will be different between residential and non-residential. And that wasn't the case before. The rules around the non-profit, non-residential property, they'll automatically be exempted if they qualify, and again, they lay it all out. But they've now removed the requirement for non-residential properties that it doesn't have to be just in the municipality in which they're located. So the benefit, that's not a restriction anymore in the new ones. So if that was the case, the applicants for a property tax exemption for 2018 would automatically get the exemption in 2019 as long as they met all the other requirements. So in both cases, section 364, so old Municipal Government Act, new Municipal Government Act, under both, council can exempt any nonprofits from taxation to any degree that they want to, but you must do so by bylaw. So that's some background information on the legislation and how that all works. So now we'll get into some specifics and give you some of the background. So background information, there are about 600 exempt properties within the town of Canmore, most of those being municipally held properties. So it sounds scary, but I'd say probably like 70% of those are our own property. There are 8 nonprofits that have been granted an exemption, 3 of which didn't qualify for the automatic. So 5 of them automatically qualify. They're a church or a school or a library, and then there was 3 that didn't. So the University of Saskatchewan in January 17 council meeting, they were provided an exemption by council from all taxes except the seniors requisition and the PAH requisition. Then in February of 2017 council meeting, both Cause Canada and Scope Society were given the same exemption by council. So all three of those do pay the seniors requisition and the PAH, but are exempt from municipal and education taxes. So what's the request? Y2Y Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative on December the 20th, so after the September 30th deadline, sent an application to the town of Canmore asking for the exemption for 2018. So a review indicated that Y2Y doesn't just benefit the general public in the town of Canmore, they benefit a far more reaching audience. Therefore, they didn't qualify for the automatic exemption under the current regulations. They occupy 5% of the total square footage of the building that they're in, and the landlord has agreed to pass along any savings. So they occupy just over 5,200 square feet of a building in Railway Avenue. And just a reminder, they will qualify in 2019. So what does that look like number-wise? And this is in your report. So if we were to exempt just Y2Y's portion of the whole building in 2017, so those are the numbers that I had to work with. So the first column gives you the type of the tax or the portion of the tax bill. The second column gives you what the total is for the whole building, because the building's taxed as one piece and not by individual rented units. And then the last column would be the 5% that is the portion occupied by Y2Y. So if council were to have granted an exemption in 2017, the total amount would have been just over $11,000. So that's sort of my background and presentation. And we're back to the recommendation about giving first, second, and third reading to the bylaw. And I welcome any questions you might have.
Any questions from council? Councillor Comfort?
So I just want to be clear. On the deadline, would that not preclude them from qualifying for an exemption?
So the Municipal Government Act says they must file the application. However, council always has the ability to not have to stick to that.
Okay, so have we done that before?
Everyone else has applied on time, but this is the first time that they are applying.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. So my question is similar to Councillor Comfort's. Was there a reason given as to why they were 2.5 months late in filing their application for this?
Not to me. However, when they first started down the process and put in their application, they had made it to our tax officer. Unfortunately, our tax officer is not in a position for me to ask her any questions,
Yep.
so I can't answer that.
Fair enough. And so with these taxes that they're become exempt from, that doesn't mean that the provincial government absorbs them. No. That means that the local ratepayer absorbs them, so they get spread amongst local ratepayers instead.
Yeah, so this is a non-residential property or commercial. So it's kind of, we talk about the pie, right? So we need to collect X amount of taxes, or the province needs to collect X amount of education taxes. Then you divide it by the assessments that are taxable. So it just means every other person pays a little bit more within that grouping, or the commercial grouping.
Right. And so just along a sideline along this road of tax exemption, in the past, seniors housing and our social housing portfolios, they used to be taxed exempt, but then the provincial government would actually backfill that amount through a grant process, correct?
Correct.
And those grants have gone away.
Correct.
So that's made an even larger burden on the local ratepayer as well.
Yeah, and that goes across residential and non-residential.
And not non-residential. I think those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Seeley?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Sanford. Just around the same line of questioning with senior housing and PAH housing, if we were to make a motion to have that paid, like some previous folks paid, In the future, would those be waived, or do we build a bylaw to include that moving forward?
So, starting in 2019, assuming that the draft regulations go ahead as they are written, then University of Saskatchewan, Scope, Cause Canada, as well as Y2Y would all fall in the same category as the Lions Club, Curling Club, all of the other nonprofits who right now have an automatic exemption. So without anything from council, they would get exemption from all taxes, including the seniors requisition and the PAH. Now, that does not preclude council from passing a bylaw. However, there are certain stipulations in there, and that's something that I'd have to explore once the regulations came out, and that's why I will be recommending in the future that we put together a bylaw so it's really clear to everyone what is the process.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Van Kampima, Y2Y has been in the same location for many years, is that correct?
As far as I know, yes.
And have they ever applied for the exemption before?
Not in the 5 years I've been here.
Okay. So, because they will be automatically exempt next year, they're essentially under the same format as they've been for the past 5 years?
That's my understanding, yes.
And can we be assured that the regulations will change next year? I mean, how do we prepare for the potential of change? Because we always have to operate under the existing regulation, correct? So if the regulation is delayed or it doesn't change until late in 2019, is that going to affect how automatic these situations become?
Yeah, so, you know, for the most part, like you said, like you saw, this would be the fourth and nonprofit entity that the change would affect. Okay? So it's not like it's a whole bunch of properties, but there are 4 that are affected. Province can always change its mind. So until you actually have it passed, there's no guarantee that that's the way it will look. Right now it is out for comment. I don't know what comments they're receiving. Someone may come back with a comment about that provision about the general public. We have no way of knowing for certain.
So are we recommending that people continue to apply until we actually do know that this is going to change in the regulation? Because there's nothing automatic if it doesn't change, right?
Correct. And even if they do have automatic exemption, actually the provisions right now, and I didn't get into that, is nonprofits still have to send in an application at least every 3 years to show and prove that they still meet the conditions. So there still would be an application process. Yeah, right now the MGA says annually unless council requires something different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in your proposed motion or recommendation, it doesn't have a time limit on it. It doesn't say 3 years. No,
actually, right now it's in the draft bylaw.
Mm-hmm.
Actually says that the bylaw is finished December 31st of 2018 at midnight. So then that way it doesn't go into 2019 or beyond. Okay. So for 2019, we would take under consideration what the situation legislatively was at that time, and then we would come back to council at that time if we had to do something different. So if they didn't get an automatic exemption for 19, then we would have to come back to council.
Okay. Councillor McCallum?
Sorry, so many questions I have generally. My head is a scary place to hang out in sometimes. With regards to the province, so will, except for that every 3 years, should this go through, the regulation go through with the provincial government, will the, within the briefing document you've provided a letter from the landlord asserting that yes, they will in fact pass those property tax exemptions on to the tenant.
Right.
How will the province regulate that? How will they ensure going forward that the landlord actually passes that on to the tenant?
Well, it actually wouldn't be up to the province, it would be up to us.
Oh, so we get that downloaded on us. Fabulous. Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions from council? Thank you, Ms. Van Kampema, for your presentation. So with that, I will move that council give first reading to Bylaw 2018-05, Nonprofit Organization 2018 Property Tax Exemption, Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Comfort?
So, just to be clear, if we pass this bylaw, does that mean that YY will receive this exemption now?
I believe that's what we're applying for, is the 2018.
That's what it means? Okay.
So it will be for this calendar year.
Okay. So I'm going to speak to it at first reading, so I've spoken. I'm inclined not to pass this at this point because there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, and I think that I'd be more comfortable doing this later on when we have a chance to examine it. And I feel very equivocal about granting an application when the deadline has been missed by a considerable amount, and the organization has been in the same location for, was it 5 years? That was what I heard. And has not, possibly they didn't know about it, but having turned down other petitioners who have come looking for forgiveness because they were late turning in their stat decks for short-term rental and so forth, I just feel this is like out of line and I can't support it. So there you go.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually have an amendment that I have sent to the clerk with regards to this. And the amendment is similar to all the other amendments that I brought forward when one of these requests have come forward, which is to exempt, should this be passed, that they would not be preclude them from paying the PAH and the seniors requisition. I feel that housing in our community is a right, and of course, when you're working for a nonprofit, generally, that pay, it tends to be even lower than what the market is paying. And I also know of at least 1 or 2 people that work for this organization that have benefited from our affordable housing programs here in our community. So I will be asking you to support this amendment with regards to exempting this, should it go forward, from PAH and seniors requisition. And that's my spiel.
Now, the motion that's on the table is referencing the bylaw 2018-05 for first reading, correct? So this is more significant than just amending that bylaw?
It actually amends the actual bylaw. So if you go into the agenda package and you look at the actual attached bylaw, it's amending the actual bylaw.
Okay, and so this wording is compliant with that then?
In 2.1, where it starts out that portion of tax roll.
Ms. DeSoto?
That's okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, so this is, the full motion would be that bylaw 2018-05 be amended, section 2.1, sorry, of bylaw 2018-05 be amended to include the wording that's on this screen.
Yeah, so the amended part is to add the PAH and seniors requisition?
Now, from a procedural perspective, Deputy Mayor Sanford, you can either move to first reading, and if first reading fails, then the amendment is not necessary. However, if first reading passed, this amendment could be made at second reading. So that would be my recommendation, is how you proceed. Councillor Comfort already spoke against first reading. Should the majority or 3 of 6 vote against first reading, then the bylaw fails and the motion isn't needed. So at this point in time, that would be how I recommend you proceed.
Okay, Ms. Van Kuympema, have something to add?
Yes, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. The Y2Y applicant just corrected my understanding, and that they have just moved into the location that they're at in the past year.
Oh, okay, so they have moved locations.
Correct.
So this is a new
So I stand
facility.
corrected.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Councillor McCallum, would that be acceptable to you to go to first reading and consider amendment at the second reading? Thank you so much. Anybody else like to speak to first reading on this bylaw 2018-05. I'm in a quandary about this because I know that Y2Y has been in the community for quite a long time and hasn't applied for the exemption before. They did miss the deadline, and I'm not sure what the reason for that would be, but I know that we're generally very consistent on managing deadlines and considering any kind of exemption or alternate decision. So Councillor Comfort had brought up a good point that this application was made in December as opposed to before the deadline of September 30th. So I'm inclined not to support the motion at this point based on the fact that the deadline date was exceeded. Anyone else like to say anything? Okay, well, with that, no other questions. I will call the question. Those in favor of first reading? Those opposed? Motion defeated unanimously. Thank you. Moving on in the agenda, we'll go to F2, the Land Use Bylaw, Amendment 2018-03, Cannabis Retail Store. And today we have Richard Williams presenting for us. Richard, stand up.
Finding my presentation.
Thank you. I knew you were putting your stick into the machine, so.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and members of Town Council. As Deputy Mayor Stanford said, my name is Richard Williams and I'm the Junior Planner here at the Town of Canmore, and today I'm introducing for first reading the Cannabis Retail Store Land Use Bylaw Amendment 2018-003. Just some background information. The Government of Canada passed Bill C-45, which is also known as the Cannabis Act, and that is set to legalise the purchase of fresh and dried cannabis, cannabis oils, plants and seeds, and that's intended to come into force as early as July or as late as September this year. The province of Alberta has also passed Bill 26, which is an act to control and regulate cannabis. It provides the AGLC with the authority to oversee the retail, the possession, consumption and online sales. AGLC recently released policies and licensing criteria where they specified the hours of operation to be between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 a.m. They set a minimum separation distance of 100 metres between schools and provincial healthcare facilities. They said that there's to be no visibility into the store from the street and no internal access to any other business from a retail store. They also specified what the municipality may do. We may pass a bylaw to vary that 100 metre separation distance, and if considered appropriate, AGLC may issue a licence. We also may apply directly to AGLC to vary that separation distance if there is no specific bylaw, and if considered appropriate, AGLC may issue a licence in that situation. We may also further restrict the hours of operation. We've had a lot of interest from the community and received numerous inquiries, and at this time we've processed applications that have requested to provide cannabis-related information and counselling and facilitate the access to medical cannabis in the community. At this point in time, currently any land use bylaw, once cannabis is decriminalised, would regulate a retail sale of cannabis as a retail store, and that's currently permitted in nearly all commercial districts. And so therefore, most of the time no development permit would be required for that use. As I mentioned before, the visibility requirement from AGLC would have implications for two sections in our bylaw. We regulate signage, in particular the window signage, and it's limited to 10% of the top or bottom of said window. And also the architectural standard encourages buildings to have visually permeable windows from the public realm. That includes the street and the sidewalk to create that interaction between pedestrians and the store. Today we're proposing a bylaw amendment that adds a new definition into our bylaw, and that would be cannabis retail store, which would mean a retail establishment licensed under provincial authority for the sale of cannabis for consumption off premises. 4 walls would physically separate the premises from any other business. And this definition parallels what a liquor store is defined as. And this use would be inserted into many, all commercial districts and direct control districts that currently allow a liquor store as a discretionary use. And these are the uses, these are the districts that currently allow a liquor store. We've got the town centre, local commercial, the Canmore Hotel, the Gateway districts, Bow Valley Trail, Three Sisters, Silvertip, Village Core, Spring Creek, and the Palliser apartment housing DC districts, which all allow liquor store as a discretionary use on the ground floor. We would also amend section 420 of the general regulation and add the cannabis retail stores as a additional requirement, and that would then require applicants applying for a development permit for a cannabis retail store to obtain approval in principle from AGLC. And we would further parallel what the liquor store requirements are. At this time, there's no separation distance from any liquor stores to each other, and we would just include that thought process with cannabis retail stores. We also further don't restrict any hours for a liquor store to be open, and we would parallel that with a cannabis retail store. With any bylaw amendment, there's the opportunity for public engagement. As outlined in the February CAL update from our communication team, we will be initiating a survey which opens today, and that will be open until the 29th of March. That's a general survey that gives the community opportunity to comment on how they feel about the legalisation of cannabis in Canmore. Those results will be summarised and presented at the public hearing. Just a side note that there would be questions contained within that survey that would more specifically relate to the spoken control bylaw. Would be also obviously open to direct feedback from the public. The proposed bylaw amendment will be available here at the Civic Centre or online, and we would accept comments directly from the public. That feedback would further be summarised at the public hearing, and as I mentioned, the public hearing would need to be scheduled, and we've tentatively suggested the 10th of April this year, and that's the formal opportunity for the public to comment on the specifics of the bylaw amendment. And such, our recommendation today is that Council give first reading to Bylaw 2018-003, Land Use Bylaw Amendment, Cannabis Retail Store, and furthermore, Council schedule a public hearing for the 10th of April 2018 at 5 p.m. And that concludes my presentation today.
Thank you.
Questions?
Can I just ask you a question to clarify? When cannabis becomes legal, that would be a federal decision, is that correct?
Correct.
And then the next level of government that will have some oversight would be the provincial government.
Correct.
And Alberta would be unique from all the other provinces because...
Correct. They've passed their own bill to... Bill 26 there to act to control and regulate cannabis, which then defers it onto AGLC, the authority to regulate all those aspects there.
Okay, so AGLC will be the agency that will manage it on behalf of the provincial government?
Correct.
And then the municipal government, that's us, we get to determine some of the regulations that we consider to be important to our community. Exactly,
yes. So we have the discretion to make our bylaw and specify things that they've already specified, in particular the setback and the hours, and also where we choose to locate the new use in the districts, which at this time we've proposed to be to mirror what a liquor store is currently located in, and those are the districts.
And all of those districts are commercial districts?
So they're commercial or direct control districts.
Okay. And
in a direct control district, it can be a little bit in between commercial or residential, and you'll note the attainable housing or rental housing options at the bottom there, and those are direct control districts, and the commercial nature is on the ground floor to facilitate that interaction at the street level to both occupants within that direct control district and the neighbourhood in general. It's not uncommon for those small retail aspects to be included in those kind of districts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Comfort?
Chatty Cathy today. So I have a question. I understand that cultivation of cannabis will become legal as well.
Correct.
So will we address that issue? Someone may want to put in a grow up, for want of a better word. Feels weird talking about this. So will we address cultivation? Will that come forward in the bylaw? So if somebody wanted to start a greenhouse, for instance.
At this point in time, we're not proposing to change the land use bylaw. The look of a growing operation is more industrial in nature. However, we would have two uses that could apply. An intensive agricultural pursuit is a use already in the bylaw, and it may fall into that, or it may fall into purely industrial, and those uses are available within industrial sections of the industrial districts within the town, and so therefore we could apply those similar uses to an applicant wishing to start an operation.
But only where the zoning applies.
Correct, in those industrial districts.
Okay. I have another question if...
Sure, go ahead.
Just to go down here. Was the policing committee consulted at all for this initial bylaw?
We have not directly discussed the bylaw change with...
Okay.
I understand that our bylaw department and the smoking control bylaw are in communication with the RCMP and understanding how their roles will change upon legalisation.
Okay, thanks. And it looks like there have to be some substantive changes to land use and smoking bylaws and so forth. It's a pretty comprehensive thing, so I look forward to the public hearing. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. Can you go back to one of the first slides where you talk about how many meters from schools and AGLC that? So within Bill 26, through the AGLC, they are, the provincial government is putting that kind of regulation on where these shops can be, correct?
It's where they regulate to obtain a license.
Okay, so does this same regulation apply to liquor stores or cigarette sales?
Not that I'm aware of. However, I have not extensively looked into the...
I don't think it does. Like, do we currently within our land use bylaw, and I don't think we do have a distance in terms of where liquor stores or where cigarettes can be sold, et cetera, away from schools or public health facilities?
So the only regulation for a liquor store would be the section here at 420 and exclude the sections that are underlined. So we don't have any additional regulation for a liquor store, separation from each other or from a school or from the hospital. So
currently the provincial government's regulation is stating that they're looking for a higher level of distance from schools than for cannabis sale than for liquor sales.
That would be
Yet
my,
the purchasing age is the same from what I've read.
yes.
Okay.
That would be my understanding of what they're proposing at this time.
So then when we have an opportunity to vary, do we have the opportunity, we have the opportunity to vary up, but do we have the opportunity to vary down as well?
Yes, so AGLC has said that we can make a bylaw to lessen the distance, and that the AGLC would still may issue the license. They're under no obligation to. And then we can apply directly if we don't put a bylaw in, as currently proposed, to vary that distance or specify any distance. And should an applicant come and apply to us that's within that 100 metre, we can apply directly on behalf of the applicant to AGLC and request from them to issue a license at this location.
Okay. But at the end of the day, it's still a discretionary use in every single one of those districts that you've listed.
Correct.
So it has to come to the town, and the town can state whether they think it's a good spot for it or not for whatever rationale is provided.
Correct. So we,
Just like we do with liquor stores.
correct.
Right. Thank you very much. Oh, actually, I had one more question. Can you, in your presentation, you used the word decriminalized, but it's not being decriminalized, it's being legalized, which is different. Is it not?
It's probably different, but they do use,
Like in Holland, it's decriminalized, but we're actually legalizing it here.
I think the
Somebody's
terminology,
nodding behind you.
the terminology,
Clearly knows more than you and I combined.
the terminology, the terminology that everybody uses, the province, AGLC, can vary, and it's not meant with any prejudice to use that wording. So I would change it if that was.
I'm not trying to make a point. I'm just trying to make sure I haven't missed something through this whole national conversation we've been having about the legalization of cannabis. And I'm really pleased to see the word cannabis used as opposed to the other word. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Williams, am I correct in understanding that cannabis and liquor will not be sold on the same premises?
Correct.
And that's Bill 26? Or is that the federal regulation?
That is, I believe that's a province. I don't think it's in Bill 26. I think that's in the AGLC policies and licensing criteria.
So we won't be able to approve an application that comes forward with those two uses in the same building. Is that correct? Because it's another level of oversight?
Correct. So we would be looking for indication from the province, from AGLC, when they submit an application for a development permit, and if AGLC is not willing to give them that, which is unlikely because they have said that they would not allow those two uses together, then we would not be able to proceed with the development permit.
So any applicant that applies to the town of Canmore should be very clear on what Bill 26 outlines and says before they even make their application to the town, because there are a lot of rules in place before they even get to us. Is that correct?
Correct. There is a lot of overlap, and it's trying to, the applicant is struggling to try to understand who to go to first and how to get through this process. However, we would be looking at an indication from the province that they, in principle, are okay with the location as intended.
Right. And being a discretionary use, that goes to the development authority for approval, correct? It doesn't come to council.
So in these districts, it would be the development officer or administration, unless there was some other part of the application that we were unable to grant. We're restricted things like setbacks and height. However, if it's just a change of use, then we are not restricted, and it would be administration making that decision.
Right. So council wouldn't be entertaining these applications on a regular basis because it would go to the development authority, which is administration.
Correct.
Okay. To clarify that. So any other questions from council on this recommendation? Seeing none, we can carry on. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams, for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. So I would like to make a motion that council give first reading to Bylaw 2018-03, Land Use Bylaw Amendment, Cannabis Retail Store. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried unanimously. And because we are required to have a public hearing, I would like to also make the motion that council schedule a public hearing for the 10th of April 2018 at 5 p.m. Discussion on that motion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And you had mentioned that the online survey will be open today until March 29th. So prior to the public hearing, we'll be able to get some feedback from the public online. So I hope that people can find that on our website and respond. Thank you. So moving on, we have F3 Bylaw 2017-30, 120-130 Kananaskis Way Residential Rental Apartment District, Control District and Bylaw 2017-34, Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan Amendment Residential Building. And we have a presentation from administration. Mr. Marcus Henry will do the presentation.
Good afternoon, members of council. Today we are here to present to you the second reading for 120-130 Kananaskis Way Direct Control District, and also Bylaw 2017-34 for the amendment to the Bow Valley Trail, the area redevelopment plan. So I'll go over a quick overview of what this presentation will cover, as there's been quite a substantial amount of changes in the DC district itself, which I think is, for the best, but I'll leave that for you guys to ultimately decide. So what we'll first hit on is the public hearing. There was a few concerns that came out of that, which were raised, and I'll touch briefly on those. And then what I'll be doing is focusing in on the key land use concerns which were raised at the public hearing, which relate to the parking and traffic, the building design and architecture, and amending the Bow Valley Trail ARP. Then what I will do is go over some of the high-level changes in the district, and so you can get a high-level understanding of that. And then we'll summarize the proposed amendments to the DC and also to the ARP. So let's start with the concerns that we heard at the open house on November 28th, 2017. First was regarding around daycare facilities. There was a question that came up, I believe, from council, which posed the question of, whether or not this development, could have the capacity to handle a daycare facility. Second one was, I'm looking at the development, how is this accommodating younger families in town? Would the applicant be pursuing a CMHC housing subsidy? Concerns related to parking and traffic, building design and architecture. How is the building fitting into the community of Canmore, as it's something a little off from what we've seen historically. Safety concerns. This is specifically related to the Highwood Village site to the south, which is a mix of retail and residential. So the concerns around this were related to vehicles entering and exiting the sites, and like poor visibility triangles, that kind of stuff. And site servicing was another one. So there was the question that came up. Does the site have the capacity and with the existing infrastructure to actually service another 159 units. And site management, the issues with this stemmed around looking at, like how the site would be maintained, and if there is any, issues with tenants, like who would people be able to go to and to resolve any of those issues. And finally, why is the town amending the Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan after all this time was spent with the public? It's called doing engagement. So I'll speak to those. However, looking at this list, there is a detailed write-up within the staff report which specifically addresses all of these. So I won't spend too much time going over those in great detail, but what I will focus on is the concerns that are specific to land use, which relate to the parking and traffic concerns, the building design and architecture, and why we're amending the Bow Valley Trail ARP. So with respect to the parking and traffic, two comments that came out of the public hearing was, like how will the traffic be handled at the intersection of Bow Valley Trail and Kananaskis Way, with an influx of vehicles expected to come from this development, and there is currently an on-street parking issue on Kananaskis Way. What's going to be done about that? So from the public hearing, administration is taking a holistic approach looking at this. With the knowledge that like vehicle demand is only one component of transportation related to this site. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at all the various modes available, whether it's by walking, cycling, or vehicle, and also looking at the proximity of local transit, whether that's regional or local within town. So from the public hearing, administration has worked with the applicant to look at reduced parking requirements. So what does that look like? Given the nature of the development, we know that it's going to be for rental market affordable housing. However, we also know, based on discussions with the applicant, that it will not be perpetual affordable housing. And from recent discussions, and I'll get into this a little bit later in the presentation, that there will also not be employee housing. However, they are providing a market rental housing, which is still a form of affordable housing, and there is a need for that in town. So on the basis of that, we've looked at the employee housing parking regulations that exist within the land use bylaw and are deeming these as a suitable approach for vehicular parking. We've also worked with the applicant to provide progressive bicycle stall requirements. This is something that is completely new within the DC. This is the first time we're doing a bicycle stall count of this nature. So like I said, when we're looking at the parking requirements for this site and we're looking at the traffic demands that could be associated with this development, we're looking at ways to offset this. And this is just one way to do that, by providing bicycle parking stalls that are not only conveniently located, but they have the ability to provide secure and highly invisible lockup. So what we're looking at here is, with a studio, it's called unit, we're looking at about one indoor stall with 1 bedroom, 1.2 stalls, 2 bedroom, 2 stalls, and 3 bedroom would have 3 stalls. But with each one of those units, this is the first time we're doing this, is we're actually indicating that they need to have a minimum of 1 indoor stall. So what does that look like in terms of, like parking within the building? So here's an example of, what the indoor parking could actually look like. And if you read through the direct control district itself, we've actually indicated that the parking needs to be off of the main floor and it needs to be at the primary access to the building. The reason, for that is so that it's conveniently located. The common practice is to have, bicycle stalls within your underground parkade. And if you're going out, you're just hopping into town, you're going to go down to the parkade, you're going to grab your car just because it's more convenient. But if you have this on the main floor as you're heading out of the building, it's almost a prompt to say, hey, I could take my bike, let's go into town. It'll be a little bit quicker for me, I'm not going to have to look for parking. I can just lock it up at like a bike stall. So that's what we're trying to achieve here on the main floor, is to have some internal parking that looks similar to this. And here's another view of what it could potentially look like. So it would be right off the main floor as you enter the building. They would have a security guard there, or a building tenant there to kind of monitor this. So it's under high visibility, but likely have a swipe pass potentially to get in here. So that's what the indoor facilities would look like. Second to that, there would be the outdoor facilities, which would be required. So we're looking at a Class 2 stall, which would be, like sheltering the bicycle stalls themselves from the elements. So that's just one example of what it could look like. And here's another example. So let's just do a little comparison of what would be approved if we went with the current stats that the applicant's showing us. So what they're showing us here is a breakdown of the unit types. So we're looking at a studio breakdown of 20 units. 1-bedroom units would be a total of 86, and 2-bedroom units would be 53, a total of 159 units. So if we ran this through what the existing district is in the Bow Valley Trail General District, we'd be looking at 41 bicycle stalls and 206 vehicular stalls. 181 of those stalls would be residential for each one of the units, and 24 stalls would be for visitors, and then there would be 1 loading stall. And if we're looking at the proposed direct control district, you can see a significant shift here in the demand for the modes that we're trying to achieve. And this is the ultimate goal of engineering and planning and moving forward. And this is just one of the first steps we're taking to actually implement this until we can get it into the land use bylaw. So what you'd be looking at here is a total of 263 bicycle stalls and 158 vehicular stalls. With the vehicle stalls, you're looking at about 142 for residential stalls and 15 visitor stalls and 1 loading stall. So, that said, what I would like to draw here too is a further comparison, just to show you that we're not too far off the mark of what's previously been approved for other like rental housing developments in town. So let's look at the Coast Apartments, which is actually right next door to this site. They have a total of 89 units. Their parking requirements are 0.75 for a 1-bedroom, 1.15 for a 2-bedroom, which is actually lower than the DC is proposing. 3 bedrooms would be 2 stalls per unit, and the visitor stall is significantly lower at 4. And then the bicycle parking for that, again, significantly lower at 0.5 per unit. So less than 1 stall per unit there. And then pretty standard is 1 loading stall for the development. Now let's look at the Palliser Mustache lands. This is another form of rental housing development, and they're looking at 148 units. With their, it's called parking stall requirements, looking at a studio. So before I even move forward, this is the employee, it's called parking requirements from right out of the bylaw. Within Section 4. So this is a standard parking requirement, and this is exactly what the DC is proposing, with the exception of the bicycle stall parking, where we're doing significant increases in that to help share the mode split. So, and here is the 12130 Kananaskis Way, it's called parking requirement. So we're looking at 159 units. Again, we're implementing the employee housing requirements for parking from right out of Section 4, but we're also including a special requirement for bicycle stalls, which is going above and beyond anything we've seen in town. And if this is to get second and third reading tonight, this will be the most progressive development in terms of integrated transportation planning that we have in town. And finally, the last thing we looked at with the applicant is it's really great, that we have the increase in bicycle stall requirements. It's really great, that we're reducing parking, but we also need to, provide, the facilities to actually use bicycles and to move pedestrians. So we've worked with the applicant to actually get some off-site improvements for pedestrian sidewalks and multi-use pathways. I'll show you exactly where those are. So here's our site outlined in blue. What you'll see along Kananaskis Way, there is this red line located right there. If you go out there right now, it's sort of a hodgepodge of sidewalks. There's missing links. So what the applicant has actually agreed to do with the joint efforts from the town is that they have committed to building called the missing links of sidewalk, which would be all the way around the corner of Kananaskis Way, and in front of the Highwood Village, which is located right here, and then right along the edge of the Mountain View Inn, which will then connect onto Bow Valley Trail. So that's a pretty significant improvement, which will help to move pedestrians from this site to Bow Valley Trail, and then from that, they can either access the downtown or they can head over to local transit, which is located right on the corner of Bow Valley Trail and Benchlands. Second to that, they have also agreed to pave a 2.5 meter, it's called pathway, along the MR lands to the north of the site. Currently, there's a gravel trail. It's fairly informal. With this development and the town, so we have agreed to contribute to a portion of this. There will be a total of 225 meters of paved pathway, which will lead directly onto Old Canmore Road, provide quick and easy access for cyclists to either get to the, it's called Shops of Canmore, which is the future development on the corner of Bow Valley Trail and Benchlands, and or to get to local and regional transit. So that's another pretty significant improvement there. So looking at the next concern we had, which was specific to the land use, is related to the building architecture and design. The concern we heard was that the architectural design of the building does not fit in with the Canmore community. So here's the concept of what the building could potentially look like. Keep in mind, it's only a concept and we're at the land use stage. So this isn't finalized, by any means, but it gives you a representation of the scale and then the mass. So with, the comment that we received at the open house saying it doesn't fit in with the community architecture and that kind of stuff is largely looking at, the single pitch roofs. So for the majority of town, you'll see a gabled roof, 612, 1012, 1212, fairly steep pitch roofs. Here, what we're looking at is more of a modern mountain architecture. And within the land use bylaw, section 9, the community and architecture urban design, it's called standards. It does actually allow for single pitch roofs. So keeping that in mind and knowing that the applicant is fairly keen to have it a single pitch roof, we have looked at the implications of that, which specifically relate to the building mass, because we know when you have a single pitch roof, the mass of the building can actually get larger. So what we've worked with the applicant on is looking at like roof design regulations. So what we're looking at is gathering the mass into the center of the site to minimize the impact on the Coast Hotel, on the Coast Apartments, and then also on Mystic Springs, and also on the Highwood Village site to the south. And how we, plan to do that is to actually just break up the roofing mass more. So we're looking at, what we consider a sawtooth roof form, or we're also looking at, it's called intersecting planes. So what does that actually look like? You're thinking I'm probably talking a bunch of yin-yang, but here we go. Here's what it actually looks like. So here's an intersecting roof plane. It just creates some distinction within the building architecture itself, as opposed to just having one long continuous plane. So that's something that we've written into the DC to try to achieve. Second to that is the sawtooth roof design with glazing. So what this will actually do is provide a variation in roof form option, so they can either do the intersecting planes, or they can look at a sawtooth design, which would allow for some glazing to go right to the roof and create some architectural interest on the building. And finally, we've also included a requirement to having a a massing diagram submitted at the development permit stage, which will help us, to understand the impact on the adjacent properties. So, why are we amending the Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan? The first reason why is the demand for affordable housing. Since the ARP was adopted, the demand for affordable housing in the community has gone up quite significantly. So what I'm looking at, I'm allowing for in the ARPs to have 100% residential developments that are specific to rental or affordable housing. Second to that, the availability of land within the town for this type of development is fairly limited, and this site is a prime location within town to do something like this. We are, extremely close to multi-use pathways. We are, about a 10-minute walk onto the town center. You're within about 400 meters onto the local and regional transit stop. You are extremely close, probably within 200 meters to goods and services once the shops of Canmore opens up. You are close to rec facilities. Elevation Place is just right around the corner. So there's really, really, great opportunity here for anybody living in this building to gain easy access, to goods and services. And finally, we want to create opportunity. So there are a few other, it's called vacant lots within the Bow Valley Trail area where we don't know what's coming in on these lots, but what we want to create is the option if there is a developer, who wants to come in to do either employee housing or affordable housing or rental housing. We want to create that opportunity, for them to have the same chance to develop lands as such. So let's go over some of the development changes, high level, for the district itself. So currently we're looking at 159 units. At the public hearing and first reading, it was 155 units. So we've seen a slight increase in units there. And that's just based on the unit mix. The applicants looked at increasing, it's called the one-bedroom and studio apartments to get a higher density of units in there. So that's where you see the increase in units come from. The landscaping and green space, previously in the direct control, it was 20%. We've worked with the applicant to bring it up to the current standards of the Bow Valley Trail General District of 25%. Vehicular parking, so 158 stalls is the bylaw requirement. So what we've seen in conceptual, unlike parking layouts and site plans, is that 75 of the parking stalls would be underground, and then the remainder would be on the surface. That said, the applicant has made us aware that they do feel they could probably achieve 175 stalls, but we're just looking at the specific requirements as a DC would dictate it now. When it comes to the bicycle parking stalls, looking at 263, so that's 219 stalls that would be indoors and 44 stalls that would be outside. Looking at 345 meters of off-site improvement as it relates to the public sidewalks and the multi-use pathway within the municipal reserve lands to the north. We've seen the FAR for this site slightly go up. It was previously shown as 1.44. We're now at 1.5. So that is also good. And one of the largest changes within this district is that employee housing will no longer be proposed. It was previously indicated from the applicant that 15% of the units would be employee housing. And from the public hearing, administration was looking at the direct control district in a little more detail. And we opted to include some of the employee housing requirements as they're already set out within land use bylaw as it relates to minimizing the unit size, looking at having a restrictive covenant on title to kind of track which units are employee housing, looking at having them addressed as employee housing, and then finally looking at employee declaration requirements for each one of the tenants that goes in those units, just to ensure that they are, functioning as employee housing units and not something else, which is a pretty standard practice for any employee housing that we do have in town. That said, the applicant has requested that we remove that requirement from within the DC, as they're unable to meet those requirements. However, employee housing is a permitted use within the district itself. The reason being is that we want to keep it flexible if there is a change of heart later on down the road, and they can achieve those requirements. So that's why you see it within the DC still. And the next significant change is the SSR scoring. So when you first saw the SSR score at the first reading and at the public hearing, the score shown was 19.71. We've had a further look in detail of the SSR, and with the removal of the affordable housing, some scoring changes to it, a few other categories as they relate to economic leadership, environmental leadership, percentage of employees housed, supports for school enrollment, floor space, strategic priorities, mix of uses proposed, recreational facilities, and program innovations. The score has dropped from 19.71 to negative 2.07. The main factor, or I guess one of the main factors for that, is the removal of the employee housing. It's because there is such a big multiplier on that, and it's something that the town is very interested in. So when you remove that from the SSR score, it does drop a fair bit. But that's not to say that this development will not be serving that, like the same intent, as I'm fairly certain that there will be employees of the town or within the Bow Valley that will actually live at this development. So it's achieving the intent. We're just removing the requirements for the applicant to actually do that. So what are the key summaries of the amendments to the direct control district? So if you look at attachment 3 within the staff report, there is a red highlighted colored version of the district, which shows all the changes that we've made from the first reading and the public hearing. And it's kind of looks like a bloodbath in there, but we think these changes are for the best. And the changes that we've seen are the regulations, for landscaping. We've increased that from 20% to 25%. Design requirements. We've included a fair amount of pedestrian connection requirements as they relate, to bicycle and pedestrian movements on the site. So what we're looking at achieving on site is the minimum pathway width of 3 meters wide throughout the entire site, to ensure that we can have 2 people passing on the same pathway at the same time without any kind of interference, whether they're on a bicycle or whether they're walking. Second is we've included the requirement for the off-site improvement of the pedestrian sidewalk along Kananaskis Way, which will be 1.8 kilometers wide and uninterrupted from the site all the way to Bow Valley Trail. Then we've looked at the connection along the municipal reserve lands. So the paved asphalt pathway that I was talking about, we've included a requirement in the DC to ensure that that gets done. And then we've looked at just including a clause in here which speaks to that engineering would be the ultimate reviewer of the pedestrian connections and the design of those, and that the town would contribute to kind of liaising with any third parties to move utility boxes or to speak with Highwood Village to kind of get the approvals in place to create these connections along Kananaskis Way, and then the developer would be the one to pay for those upgrades at the end of the day. The design requirements continued. So, like I previously mentioned, we've included the route design regulations as it relates to, like drawing the mass towards the center of the site, looking at a sawtooth route form or having intersecting planes. And then the other thing which is of importance here is that we've included a regulation to minimize the amount of length that a single plane can be. So we've looked at the design and said 45 meters would be suitable just given the size of the site and then the proposed mass of the building. And then finally, as I've already mentioned, we've added in a requirement for the massing diagram to be provided at the development permit stage. And we've included the new bicycle parking requirements. And we've actually indicated, as I previously mentioned, that the indoor and outdoor bike facilities need to be within close proximity to the main building entrance. Additional requirements that we've added as well relate to tree protection measures along the municipal reserve lands. So there is a dense forest area that we're not 100% sure of where the property line, starts and ends. We have an idea of where it is, but what we're looking to see with this condition is that, prior to any construction on site, they actually have this, surveyed and fenced off to minimize any kind of disturbance into the, the trees within the municipal reserve lands. The next additional requirement we've added is to provide a children's a playground or a similar type of recreational amenity. So this came out of the comment that we got at the public hearing, which said, how is this going to accommodate young families? And this is just one way that the applicant's committed to doing that. And finally, a requirement for some public art. It's part of the SSR scoring, and what the applicant is potentially looking at is some, quite unique, play environments that would be quite aesthetically pleasing and would go beyond, your standard playground that you would see out at, say, a Millennium Park. It would be something, quite unique, to amplify and create some vibrancy within the public realm of the development. Summary of amendments to the Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan. These actually have not changed from the public hearing at all. They are, outlined within the report, but they specifically all relate, to allowing for 100% residential development within the ARP as it, relates to rental housing. I've realized that I haven't provided the recommendation slide, but our recommendation is to have second and third reading tonight. And I open the floor to any questions you may have, and thanks for listening to my lengthy presentation.
Well, thank you. You gave us a lot of information, so I'm sure we all had questions about many of the things you covered, so thanks very much for doing that. Any questions from council on Mr. Henry's presentation?
No questions. Fantastic.
Hang on a sec.
You're all giving me the stink eye.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure why she's not. Oh.
I was here for a public meeting last week, and my daughter came because we didn't have a sitter, and she gravitated right to the spot and sat here and just gave everybody the stink eye. It was pretty funny. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for all the hard work between you and the developer on the vast amount of changes that have been reflected in the regulation. I do have some questions. One question that just came up is, where's the building height? It talks about a distinct architectural element may reach a height of 23 meters when located to the center of the site, and about roof plane, but I didn't see what the actual height was going to be.
So if you look under the regulations, within the DC district itself, so section 3.4, and then you look at section 3.46, the maximum building height shall be 21 meters.
And I went through that 5 times. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much.
No worries.
That was an easy one. What's class 2 stall?
So a class 2 stall is, like a sheltered stall, essentially. It's anything
Covered?
just above. Yeah, it's a covered stall. It goes beyond just your standard you rack out in the exposed elements.
Cool. That's what I thought. I thought I'd ask.
Yeah.
The DP will come back to council for approval, correct?
That is how it reads within the regulations for the Development Authority.
Just wanted to say it out loud.
Yes.
That's all. So I sat on the Bow Valley Trail ARP committee when the ARP was first passed, and that was prior to that was in 2011, I believe, actually. And one of the concerns that came from the development community actually was the balance between commercial and residential on the Bow Valley Trail. And there were quite a few discussions that and there was amendments made and so on and so forth. And so this last parcel in this particular part of the general district is the last parcel in this area. And so we're making these changes to the ARP, or we're proposing these changes to the ARP rather, so that the ARP is in alignment with the DC district. Mm-hmm. But I was wondering if you can speak to that overall concern that I haven't heard recently, but we know that housing and rental housing in particular is a deep need in our community. And we know that this neighborhood is predominantly commercial. And I guess one of my concerns would be that with these 2 new residential buildings coming into play, that there might be an expectation that the balance has flipped, that it is now a primarily residential neighborhood, which I don't believe is the intent of any of these changes that have come into play. So could you speak to that for me, please?
I sure can, and you're absolutely correct. That should not, be the intent of the amendment, is to allow a more residential, to overtake it's called the split of the commercial, that's already existing. So I've thought about this actually, and I don't. So it is a fairly complex, it's called like question. In the broadest sense, that the only way to really figure this out is we'd have to go and pull every development permit for every site that was ever approved, and we'd have to look at the main floor plans, or look at all the floor plans, figure out like what the approved uses were for each unit, and then we'd have to do an ultimate tally of that. So that said, I didn't really have like all the time to go and do that, and this is something that I've been thinking about as well. And I wanted to show something that we do have within our GIS system here at the town, which I think will help explain and show the intent, that we're not shifting away from the commercial nature of the Bow Valley Trail General District, and that we are just like really providing an opportunity here to address our community need. So what you can see here on this visual is called the outline of the Bow Valley Trail General District within this area. And what I've been able to do with our GIS system is it's open up an existing land use called layer, and which actually shows on each parcel, whether it's a mixed-use development, whether it's fully residential, whether it's fully commercial, whether it's a mix of retail. So what I've been able to do is look at this and provide you this overlay. So when we look at this, you can see right here in this little side legends, I've gone through each one of the parcels and looked at it and just labeled what they are. So there is one, it's called mixed-use industrial and commercial lot, which is the Grizzly Paw, it's called brewery. There are 5, it's called residential and visitor recom, it's called lots. So those are split. Let's just assume that it's a 50-50 split, which is likely not the case. But even if it is, looking at the overall tally here of what the commercial uses are, which are all shown in orange, the overall residential would be far, it's called lower than anywhere near 50%.
Great.
To give you an exact number, I really couldn't, but just looking at, on the basis of this map, it indicates that we are, achieving the intent of the ARP still, and that we're not, creating a new residential district, essentially.
Yeah, and I understand that it's, we have one building that's all, or one lot that's all residential, and then 2 lots away is an entire lot that's pure commercial.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure that we were addressing that concern, because it had come a few times over those few years when the ARP had passed. And,
Could I just interrupt you for a moment? Because
sure.
Mr. Fark has something to add to this.
Oh.
Sorry, if I could just supplement the comments from Mr. Henry. We also have recent direction from council around no longer allowing mixed use in buildings in this district. So historically, we have allowed some residential and some commercial, usually visitor accommodation, to be in the same building. And we have direction from council directing administration not to have that on a going forward basis, because we've had quite considerable problems with both the regulation of those units and with the experience of people residing within those units. And so on a going forward basis, in order to allow for any essential residential development within this district, it would have to be within a purely residential development. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to maintain any type of residential component. So even though we are, or I guess put another way, in order to maintain the balance that still allows for some residential within the district, some buildings that are purely residential will need to occur. Otherwise, it won't be possible with the recent direction from council.
Actually, I believe the recent direction from council was with regards to visitor accommodation of residential. You could certainly have other kind of non-residential uses in that building that weren't tourist home or visitor accommodation. So that would be the only correction I would have to that. Thank you for this. This was a lot of work in a short period of time, so I appreciate it. Can I keep asking questions? Does anybody else have any questions, or can I keep asking mine?
Councillor Comfort has a question. Maybe we'll give her a turn.
Perfect.
Okay?
Go for it.
So thank you for your presentation, and it's a lot of work. So I have two questions. The first one is, you yourself noted there was a substantial change to the initial presentation. And I wonder, at what point do we decide there was enough change to warrant a second public hearing? Not that I want to do that, I just...
Yeah, no, and that's a really good question. To that regard, the changes that we do see within the district are a direct relation of what we heard at the public hearing. So in this instance, I would say that it's perfectly suitable to move forward. If we went, to the public hearing, and we only had a few comments come back, and then we went and made a significant amount of changes, which had no, I guess, relation what we heard at the public hearing, then I would say yes, we should go back and have another one. But just given the basis that everything that it's called change within the district came directly out of the public hearing, I think that's what the public hearing is for, is to hear the concerns of the public, and this is our way of addressing that.
Thank you, and good answer. My second question is regards to the public art. So that's very intriguing, and I guess we'd have a look at that at
the development permit.
Yeah. And would the developer consider doing a presentation for the Canmore Public Art Committee? Because I know they'd be very interested to see it.
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer, but the developer is here if you would like to probe them.
Okay.
With questions.
We'll send them an invitation to do a presentation.
Okay, great.
Thanks, that's it.
Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you for the presentation. When it comes to, one of the concerns that I heard was people are concerned that this will become a condo down the road. How many parking stalls would be needed for it to even have a chance of becoming a condo?
Yeah, so if I'll just flip back to a previous slide that I had shown you here, which did the comparison of the Bow Valley Trail General District and what would be required. So if there were to go to a condominiumization, they'd have to follow the parking regulations in Section 4, which is what you see here, which would be 206 stalls. So the chances of providing that on site is not great.
And then one other thing was with the main reason for not going for the employee housing was the unit size. Like basically their unit sizes are bigger than, or one of the reasons is their unit sizes are bigger, and so they don't meet our employee housing standards. So, but with that being the case, I still would expect a lot of locals and or people working in Canmore to
So just
look at this building. So
yeah, just give me 1 second here, and I'll find the employee housing unit size requirements. Okay, so what And you're exactly right. It's just that the units that the applicant wants to propose are slightly larger, and they didn't want to comply with the minimum requirements that we have for employee like housing units, which is, for a bachelor or residential suite is 37 meters squared. For a 1-bedroom, we're looking at 51 meters squared, a 2-bedroom, 65 meters squared, and a 3-bedroom, 84 meters squared. So they want to provide something slightly larger than that, which opens up a different market for them than what we see elsewhere, like around town. So that's just one of the reasons why they are unable to meet that requirement.
Thank you.
Councillor Seeley?
Mr. Henry, just what I heard at the public hearing, there's a lot of questions about parking and congestion, and we're trying to encourage multimodal transportation. Just wondering about the parking number. I heard that 159 units, 158 stalls. It seems a little bit of a mismatch there. If you have that, you should have maybe a little bit extra, and we can grow up to 175 stalls. So I guess my question is two parts. Are you going to continue to work with the applicant to get the right number? And do you need a motion of council to determine that? It seems like it'd be more you and the applicant working through that.
That's something we could do if there was a motion from council, but just based on the presentation and like the research and then the work that we've done, we feel fairly confident that the measures that we've put in place with the bicycle stall requirements, the location of those bicycle stalls, the requirements for the indoor stalls, and then also with the off-site improvements that we have a level of comfort at the vehicular demand for this site will be less. And that's all said without a TIA, but at the time of the development permit, a TIA will be required, and we'll look at that in a little further detail, just to kind of confirm our research.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I can't tell you what the right number is. I think you would probably have a better understanding of that. And again, with 159 units, 158 stalls, I think maybe it should be a little more, but I don't know what the right number would be.
Right.
I like the calculation.
Yep.
It seems to make a lot of sense, and encouraging multimodal transportation for that site is a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, and I would also just like to point out that there is local and regional transit just right around the corner within about 400 meters. So just another option and another opportunity to actually split the modes here on this site.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Fark?
And sorry, once again, just to supplement Mr. Henry there, we also have to remember that, especially when it comes to traffic and congestion, we have to compare it not just to other residential, but what would be permitted currently under the existing district, and how much traffic and congestion that existing permitted would be. So currently you could do a commercial development in there, a hotel, that would have similar or if not slightly lower parking requirements than the ones that are being currently proposed, because we have a lower parking requirement for commercial, for hotels, for example. So the traffic and congestion in comparison to what could be approved today without a change of land use is an important consideration as well.
Mr. Henry, it really looks like these numbers are putting us toward a mode shift, and people that move into this facility will be very aware of the fact that there is a certain amount of parking, but the encouragement is for bicycle use, transit use, pedestrian use, because it's the proximity to the town center is very easy, and it's flat, which is a nice part of Canmore if you can have a nice walking path in an area like that. And the developer is also proposing to enhance that multimodal concept with pathways and sidewalk configurations. One of the things that in the developer's report is that they're proposing 75 rack stalls installed above each parking space.
Yes.
Can you describe what that looks like when you put a rack stall above a parking space?
Right. I wish I had a visual for you.
Okay, we can describe it.
Yeah, but essentially what you'd be looking at, it's called two options you can either do. You can either have a side mount, bicycle rack, which just mount like your bike. It's called flush to the wall, or you can have a vertical one, which could actually go above the stall. So there's a few options there. We haven't seen exactly what that looks like. Again, it's a development permit, on kind of detail. But what we would be looking for is that we have engineering look at that detail, specifically, just to make sure that it, would work with a vehicle in a parking stall, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at the numbers of the parking stalls, bicycle stalls, specifically 263, that's all the different configurations that you described. There's outdoor stalls, there's main level stalls inside, there's underground parking stalls as well.
Correct.
So that covers the full gamut. And then in the development permit, we'll see how many stalls are in each one of those
That's the intent.
configurations?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless they were to change the unit count, and then the bicycle stalls can go either up or down, depending on the unit type.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. So the transportation impact assessment, what will it provide? Will it provide administration or the developer any solutions for parking constraints in that particular district? So currently there is a parking problem. We saw it in the public hearing. We saw people state that they had bought a vacation accommodation unit with one parking stall, and they were relying on street parking to subsidize their business model, basically. Right. And so my question is that we've got these wonderful carrots, wonderful bike stalls. If I didn't have kids, I'd live there. Walkable to Elevation Place, to bus, etc. But how do we make sure, or how is this transportation impact assessment going to give us some solutions on how we can encourage people to use them, as opposed to thinking, well, I only have one parking stall, but I'm bringing my 3 cars.
Yeah. So that's the beauty of a TIA, is that we can work with the developer and we can work with their consultant to kind of define the scope. So if there is concern from council that, we need to be looking at, say, like a parking management strategy, or we need to be looking at, like how to manage parking on site, those are the kind of mitigations that we can include into the scope of the TIA. So if that is something that is a concern with council, that's something that, we can definitely look at including into the scope of it.
Okay. So I actually have an amendment that I'm going to propose when we get to voting time that sort of speaks to that, because I see this as being a really important part of the success of this development. What I don't want to see in 5 years is a parking problem or a problem with congestion that exists already with the current folks that inhabit that space. And then we build these buildings and they point to density and say, this is the problem with density, when the problem existed already. And because I don't think that those buildings are going to be the problem necessarily. I think it could maybe add to the problem if we don't start managing it better. And inviting that neighborhood to ask for solutions as well. Because I think that there are people in that neighborhood that want to be part of the solution. So I just say that out loud now. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Comfort?
No, my question was answered.
Okay. Councillor Mara?
Thank you. I'm just curious here. I don't see anywhere where it indicates any handicap parking. Do you know how many stalls are on site for handicap parking?
Excuse me, can I interrupt? Could you please turn off your cell phone? Or donate $50 to the food bank, because that's usually our rule. That's the fine.
So to recap, you are looking to see...
Yeah, is there any requirement for handicap?
There is a requirement for
spots?
handicap parking stalls, and that comes out of the Building Code Act.
Okay.
And so with the required amount of parking stalls, within that would be a selected amount of handicap stalls that are to be provided. I believe it's 1 per 25 stalls.
Okay.
So
that is in your formula? Okay.
It's included.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Mr. Seeley, or sorry, Councillor Seeley?
On building height, it talks about considering reduced mass to adjacent neighboring properties. What would that look like?
Sorry, which section are you referring to exactly?
Just right under building height, so 3.6.2.
6.2.
The public hearing, I heard some concerns from neighboring properties that
Right.
that wouldn't be considered. So I think that's an important consideration.
Yeah. So that's one thing that we've worked into the roof design guidelines. So what we would be looking at is to kind of gather the mass of the building into the, like the center of the site, as opposed to having it onto the sides, which would overlook onto Mystic Springs, onto the coast apartments, and or onto the Highwood Village. So what we would be looking, to do there, if they have a single pitch roof, and we'd be looking to have on the lower end of the eaves to be on the, it's called side of the properties, and so that there's less mass. I'm actually overlooking onto the neighboring properties.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Comfort?
I did have a further question. I just wondered, do we have any idea of the range of rents? I know they probably don't want to specify at this point in time, but now that there's no dedicated staff housing, I'm curious to know where that lies, but if you can't answer, then
That is a great
answer.
question, and that is outside of my scope of work, but
Okay.
the applicant is here again, and they can answer that if you're really keen to ask.
Okay, maybe at the break. Thank you.
Councillor McCallum?
So I've heard that question come a couple of times, and I think there's actually a misunderstanding on this side of the table as to what the employee housing actually meant. So employee housing is still a permitted use in this proposed bylaw, but it's not titled to each unit.
Correct.
So there's a difference when we talk about employee housing. There's an employee housing district, and those units, you must work 20 hours a week in the valley, you have to be a permanent resident, so on and so forth. There's other criteria, whereas there's the difference between that and employee housing zoning. So this could still be employee housing, it's just not titled, that it's not being proposed as being titled through caveat. I know enough to be dangerous. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. And I just have heard that question come a couple of times, so there's nothing stopping this from still being unit by unit employee housing. It's just that it's not, and even with those other units, there was no price cap on what those were sold for. By nature of them being small, it was understood that the price would come down. And that, I'm going to guess, is what's going, that same principle is what's going to this building. By nature of it being small, the cost of the unit is going to not be the same as 1,000, 1,500 square foot rental flat somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think
I
from...
just don't want that narrative to get out into the
yeah.
community. That's what I'm concerned about, that we're building this, but it's not for employees, because that's not the case.
But I think from Mr. Henry's presentation, he clearly outlined that there are regulatory requirements for employee housing where you have to actually monitor them, and if we put in these restrictions, then they would have to be managed.
Well,
And
we couldn't put these restrictions in because there's one
no,
title. There's
well, that's
one
what I'm
owner,
saying. Is so
right?
that adds another level of complexity to the project, although the unit sizes are small enough that they would appeal to employees. And in this iteration of the bylaw, there are no 3-bedroom units being proposed?
Yes, just based on the mix that we've been provided, there is not any, it's called 3-bedroom units proposed, but that's not to say that they're,
It's permitted, but
right.
they're not at this point proposing it,
Currently
although
not
they
being
are
shown.
proposing more units at smaller sizes.
Right.
But not to monitor who actually lives there, right?
Correct.
It's open to
anybody.
to the market.
Yeah.
So I think that compromise, in a sense, enhances the likelihood of employee housing in this particular project, because you've got the smaller units sizes, and that's where the appeal would likely be.
Exactly.
So I think we do understand it, and perhaps just the regulatory nature of it is a little bit different, but thank you for
No
explaining
worries.
that.
I just was worried because I don't want that narrative that employees aren't going to live here to get out in the community, because that's not the intent of this long exercise.
No, I think that we're coming to understand that. Thank you. Councillor Hillstead?
Thank you. And if they do get the CMHC financing, do we know the percent that they have to be below market, or is it
10%.
10%?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's for 10 years, so, and that's on every single, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So that also contributes to that, without having to regulate each unit,
Right.
because it's a blanket situation. Any other questions from council? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Henry, for your presentation. So the first item that we need to address is the Bow Valley Trail area redevelopment plan. Is that correct, Mr. Henry? That would be the first thing that we need to do, is amend the Bow Valley Trail ARP?
That is correct, because,
Okay.
Because without that, we couldn't actually approve.
Okay,
The land
perfect.
use.
So that's the order that I will do that in then. So I'd like to give bylaw 2017-34, Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan Amendment, second reading as proposed by administration, and the outline is on attachment 2. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor McCallum?
An amendment for it, for that piece that the clerk has a copy of. And the amendment is just to underpin that in the purpose statement, that this is primarily a commercial district. That this residential development is occurring in a commercial district, so that it doesn't get lost. In 5.1 of the Bow Valley Trail Area ARP, just super simple. Everything except what's underlined is already what's stated in the purpose statement, and I've just underlined my amendment, which is in a primarily commercial district as articulated in 5.1 of the Bow Valley Trail ARP.
And would that be in alignment with what administration's recommendation would be?
Could I just clarify? I believe this amendment is to the land use district, and I believe what is before
what were
on the
we
floor
No,
right
I'm
now is
reading the
amendment to
area redevelopment plan right now.
plan.
Oh, you're right. My apologies. Absolutely. Sorry.
Okay, so what is on the table for the council consideration? Ms. DeSoto?
Yes, so just looking to Councillor McCallum that she'll withdraw that until the land use bylaw
Yeah, sorry,
amendment is on the table, and then you move forward with first reading of the ARP amendment.
Okay, so we will withdraw that amendment.
Yes.
So we're doing land use right now.
No, we're doing
we're doing ARP.
ARP, the Area Redevelopment Plan first.
Right. So I had 2 amendments.
For the... So you wanted to amend the ARP?
I'm trying to find my amendment.
I believe your amendments were, as I see, to the DC district, so to the land use bylaw.
Okay. So they're both to the land use bylaw.
That's,
Thank you. All right, I'll stop
that's
talking
my
now.
understanding. Yeah.
This is the perfect time to start talking because we're talking about the motion and it's open for discussion. So Council give bylaw 2017-34 Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan Amendment, second reading as proposed by administration. And we're not proposing anyone have any amendments to propose to that? No? Any discussion on the motion? No discussion? I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None? Approved unanimously. And so now the significant part of this is we have to do third reading first, okay? So then, once we have second reading, I'm going to call for Bylaw 2017-34, Bow Valley Trail Area Redevelopment Plan Amendment, third reading as proposed by administration. Any discussion on the motion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. So now we will move on to the next motion, correct? That council give bylaw 2017-30, 120 to 130 Kananaskis Way DC District, second reading with amendments as proposed by administration. So we've already heard those amendments recommended by Mr. Henry, and I will call for any further proposed amendments. Councillor McCallum?
So I have two proposed amendments. The first one is to the purpose statement. And it's just to ensure that with this addition of residential, that it is understood as per the ARP intent, that it is primarily a residential or a commercial district.
And I look to administration to determine that that's in alignment with what is being recommended with Mr. Henry's.
We have no objections. Looks great.
Okay, great.
It's boots and it's belts and suspenders approach.
Right,
I understand that. I just wanted it to be clear. That's all.
No, I think that's a good suggestion, especially since we had that earlier discussion about the intent of this, of the Bow Valley Trail ARP. It's clear. Any discussion on Councillor McCallum's amendment? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. So that's the motion for... Ooh. I didn't touch anything, but my microphone's still on. It's nice that the mayor's microphone stays on. That's a good.
Awooga.
So now, are there any further amendments to bylaw 2017-30? Councillor McCallum?
And the clerk may need a minute for her computer to fire up. It's 3X, it's an additional and under 3X6, so it's 6.5 is the last point. So with the addition of 6, and I'll read it out, hoping that the machine warms up. At the time, okay. At the time of development permit submission, a traffic impact assessment will be required at the expense of the developer, which includes detailed information for parking management strategy to ensure that parking for the development is managed appropriately and will minimize the potential for adverse impacts related to on-street parking. Kid's at home alone. I bet you she's scared.
Maybe she did it.
No way. I should just text the neighbor. Pow, 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 pow. Pardon? Well, she's probably bummed. It was probably burnt out halfway through her spaghetti getting nuked up. That is the first time ever. Uh-huh.
Does anybody have any indication if... Do we have any indication if the video is still functioning? Okay. So we've had a power failure, and now we're turning on and off the machines. Amazing. Okay. Now, where was I? We're still amending the same motion,
Yeah, so the
correct?
developers already agreed to the parking management, or sorry, to the TIA, and so I'm just including parking management strategy as scope within the TIA.
TIA being the Traffic Impact Assessment. So we're adding this as an amendment at second reading to the 2017-30 Kananaskis Way DC District. Any comments from administration on this? Okay, I don't see anything. So any discussion from council on this amendment? Councillor Comfort, did you want to say something?
I think this is an excellent amendment, Councillor McCallum.
Thank you.
It may go a long way to making people feel better about the parking situation over there, and perhaps realizing that the improvements the developer has proposed with the new pathways and rehabilitated pathways present an opportunity for walking and cycling, the multimodal, and roam, of course. Mm-hmm. So I think it's great amendment. I will support it.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried unanimously. So now, with those two amendments by Councillor McCallum, I would like to invite Council to give Bylaw 2017-30, 120 to 130 Kananaskis Way DC District second reading with amendments as proposed by administration and recently approved. So we're on second reading. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? None? Carried unanimously. So now we can go to third reading on Bylaw 2017-30, 120 to 130 Kananaskis Way DC District third reading with amendments as proposed by administration and recently approved. Any discussion on that motion?
I'll speak to it.
Okay, well.
I hope I'm not the only one.
Sorry, are you, oh, you did? Okay, please do speak.
So I'll be pleased to support this at third reading. I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into the changes since the public hearing between the developer and administration. Inclusion of home occ for childcare purposes, an extensive increase in bicycle parking, pathway improvements, pedestrian improvements, bicycle parking, the playground, public art, actually giving us a verification of where the parking numbers came from, which is from an employee parking matrix that we have. Additional public realm and additional landscaping. I think this is a really great project in a really weird corner, and I look forward to seeing what it looks like in the end, and I look forward to visiting my friends in there. I think that we've just, in 2 years, it'll look amazing that we have 150 odd more units of, and I hate using the words homes for people that live in Canmore. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So I thank everyone who worked so hard on this.
Thank you. Councillor Seeley?
I too appreciate all the work that's gone into this. It's a project that I've been looking forward to, with the second apartment being considered in Canmore. We haven't built this sort of accommodation in about 40 years, so it's nice to see the housing stock come into market. And rental is certainly a big and important part of that. So it should add some diversity, some more housing stock, and address our very important need of affordable housing. So I'll be happy to support it.
Councillor Hillstad?
I will also be happy to support this because affordable or housing in general for rental accommodation is something that's sorely needed here, and for everything that my fellow councillors have already said, can't really say too much more, so I'll be happy to support as well.
Thank you. I too will be happy to support this. I think the changes that have been proposed have been sensitive to the community and to the public hearing information that we received. I think looking at the location of this property and realizing that it could be a fairly impacted hotel development with parking implications, you know, I think the consideration to turn this into an apartment zoned property is appropriate, and the location is ideal, I think. And so thank you very much for all the hard work, and I think you did a really good job working through to make this a better project from what was proposed at first reading. So thank you very much for doing that. Would anybody else like to speak? With that, I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. All right. With that, I would like to call a 10-minute break. We have a couple of more items on the agenda.
here to support you.
I forgot to ding the beginning of my meeting. Too many things to remember.
Only a couple
Okay.
of times a day, I think.
I'd like to call the meeting back to order and go to the next item on the agenda, which is number G1. And it's the wastewater treatment plant Influent lift station pump upgrade capital project additional funding request. And Mr. Como, Manager of Public Works, is here to speak to us about that today.
Yes,
Thank
I
you.
am. Thank you. Town Council, I have just a quick presentation that I will walk through to just help make things a little bit more clear as to what this project is and why we need the additional funding. That's the recommendation there that Council approve the increase of the funding by $100,000 with the funding source to come from the utility rate, the utility reserve. Just to help explain what exactly we're talking about, even though this was a capital project that was approved. This is what we call the front of the wastewater treatment plant. You can see the yellow bars there. Just below that, we have 4 pumps sitting in there. In 2013, we replaced 2 of them, upgraded them, so they had come to their end of their useful life, as well as we increased the size or the capacity of them. This project is to increase the other 2 of the 4. Sorry, they're in the, Council Mara, they're in the ground, underneath those metal plates, yeah. So the project, as I said, was to increase the size as well as, because they are bigger pumps, they will require upgrades to the electrical and the controls. And the project also looked at increasing the generator. There's a standby generator a couple of rooms down from this in case they do lose power like we witnessed here tonight, which is not a big deal if we lose power here, but if we lose power at the wastewater treatment plant, we've got problems. So the generator kicks in, we need to ensure that it's the right capacity. And so we had originally proposed going up to 650 kilowatt unit. However, when we had done a study with the pumps, we recognized that we would need to actually go up to 750 kilowatts to make sure that we could run this pump as well as all the other critical information or infrastructure at the wastewater treatment plant to keep it functioning during a power outage. So at that point, then we would need to increase going from a 500 kilowatt to actually 750 kilowatts, so a 50% increase in the capacity of it. Now, when you go to such a 50% increase in the generator, you've got a much larger unit you need to put into this room, and in order to accommodate that, we need to do modifications to the floor to accommodate the weight, as well as the ventilation for the heat that's generated in this facility as well, to make sure we dissipate that air. So when we priced that out, when we went out to bid, competitive bid in the fall, prices that were received back from EPCOR were having us exceeding the current approved budget, which would require us to come back for an additional $100,000 from the $760,000 to $860,000. So when we increase the capital project in the utility rate model, we have the ability to accommodate that increase. The reserve balance at year 5 or 2021 is still can accommodate that. We're still going to be about $3.6 million above the reserve balance, which we have at $6.5 million. So we're able to fund that. And just to let council know that part of the half of the project has been assigned to the off-site levy model. So 50% of the project would be put into the model and recovered by off-site levies over time as well. And just to show you where the balance is, that dashed line is the end of the 5-year, and you can see that the green line is what our reserve balance is, and the red line is what our target is. So you can see we're well above that. We're not currently there, but each year we try to make our way there. And as I've shared this with council before, this is always typically what it looks like. We're a little bit below, but we get above as we approach the 5-year. And with that, there's the recommendation, and I can answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions from members of council? Councillor Comfort?
Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Canmore. I just wondered, why wouldn't something like this be picked up in the design phase? Like would it not have occurred to?
I believe what happened here is we've done a number of other upgrades to the plant, including the DAF, which is critical infrastructure. So all of those things collectively have had an impact on what the size of the generator, standby generator, should be. So this was sort of the catalyst that said, well, we were looking to upgrade it. We've done all these other upgrades. We've done an evaluation of the power study, and we've determined that we actually need to increase it by 50% instead of the 150 kilowatts.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Canmore? No other questions, so thank you for your presentation. So with that, I will ask Council to approve an increase in funding for capital project number 1754, wastewater treatment plant Influent lift station pump upgrade from $760,000 to $860,000, with the additional $100,000 funded from the wastewater utility reserve. Any discussion on that motion? I think your presentation made it fairly clear that this is something we have to do and that the funds are in reserve for this very purpose. And I would be happy to support the motion. Anyone else care to speak? Okay, I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? None? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. And moving on to G2, community grant funding allocation. Thank you for waiting so long, Ms. Brown, to make your presentation.
Oh, I was here anyways. My pleasure.
So we have Lisa Brown, the Manager of Community Social Development, making a presentation on community grant funding allocation.
Thank you. Good evening, Deputy Mayor, members of Council. Tonight I'm here to seek approval on amendment to the community grant policy. If approved, the amendments that I'm proposing tonight will clearly articulate the purpose of the granting stream, which will help Community Grant Selection Committee with evaluating and allocating grant funding, and will give clear guidelines to potential community grant applicants. The significant policy changes are captured in Section 4, which is titled Eligibility. To be eligible, applicants must demonstrate fit with the purpose of the grant. And with these amendments, I'm proposing that we clarify the purpose. For the community initiative applicants, the purpose of the community grant is to provide one-time project funding. And I'm proposing that it is also, that the purpose is expanded to include to support community organizations with launching new project initiatives, to launch a new event or program that promotes increased community access to organizations, to create a community awareness campaign in support of an informed and educated community, and to initiate a new community project aimed at increasing community connections or connectedness. For the community event applicants, the purpose of the community event grant is to create community development and promote the town as a destination for activities that fit our community identity while promoting a vibrant and engaged community. And I'm proposing that we expand the purpose to also include to support sporting events at the provincial, national, or international level, to support unique one-time cultural events, to create a unique one-time social experience that connects visitors and residents within Canmore, to improve destination awareness and sustainable tourism, and to increase civic pride through community celebration. We also discontinued the community safety stream. Past applicants didn't seem to fit the criteria, and as we were narrowing the criteria to be more specific, we found that it was becoming so narrow that it was going to be out of the scope of most organizations. So what will change? The current practice for the Community Grant Committee is once the grant competition closes, administration removes the applicants who are considered ineligible, and our ineligible applicants can then, they will often ask for us to reevaluate their status. And they're usually ineligible because they're late, and it's usually for a reason like a family emergency or something like that. So what I'll ask from the ineligible applicants is if they can send me a letter, which I will present to the committee, and then it's the committee's choice whether or not they become eligible. The committee will then review and rank all eligible applicants based on criteria set out in the policy. And so the policy right now doesn't have a purpose, a very specific purpose for each stream. So how we rank is a demonstrated fit with the town of Canmore's current vision and goals, a demonstrated fit with the purpose, and the purpose at that point was a very loose, like for the community initiative, it said that for activities in sports, recreation, art, social services. Benefit to residents of Canmore, ability to complete the project within 12 months or less, project is new and innovative, and the project budget and timelines are reasonable. The committee then allocates funding based on their ranking or score based on those criteria that I just listed. If these amendments are approved, before ranking eligibility, the committee will evaluate the applicant's effectiveness and demonstrated fit. So what that means is the scoring sheet will change. So currently what we do is we rank based on that eligibility section, and then if you're eligible, then we'll go to, can you see that? Sorry. Oh, perfect. Then we'll move on to the criteria of demonstrated fit with the current vision, demonstrated fit with the purpose, benefits to residents, and rank and score on that. So what I'm proposing now is once the committee reviews eligibility, it will be yes or no. So if you're eligible, yes, then you move on to the purpose of the grant. And the purpose of the grant will fit with the purpose of the grant in the granting stream under that section 4 of eligibility criteria in the policy. So the purpose then will match the policy exactly. If we do fit with the policy purpose, then we'll move on to ranking and scoring. So first we're going to look at eligibility, then we're going to look at purpose, and if fits purpose, then we move on to the ranking and scoring, same way as we did prior. Which is this one. I moved a few of the rankings from last year because I moved it into eligibility. So once an applicant has been considered eligible, fits with the purpose, and is now in the grant ranking, they'll be allocated funding based on their score. The higher scores will get 100% of the funding, and then the lower scores will get 75%, and the lower scores 50%. That the scoring is based on how many applicants we have who are eligible, and the proportion of the budget that they would be seeking. We only have $30,000 for community initiative, and we have $50,000 for community events, which has to go through 2 granting streams. So in summary, I am seeking for council to approve the community grant policy, CSD 001, as amended. Thank you very much for your time this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Comfort?
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Brown. So you have under the community initiative grants, one-time project funding, one of the categories is to create a community awareness campaign in support of an informed and educated community. Can you give me an example of a project like that?
A good example would be if you were doing an awareness campaign of some kind, or if you were maybe promoting healthy food education. So last year we had an applicant who was awarded a grant to do a website to promote healthy food education in the Bow Valley. So that would fall under that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Brown, I just had a question for you on the last point you made about that applicants would get a percentage of funding based on the score, and you mentioned 100% or 75%.
Yeah.
But it's only, aren't we only supporting up to 50% of the projects? 50%?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's 100% of their ask.
So 100% of the ask. Okay. Yeah. So we only at the very beginning of the policy, it says to provide up to 50% of the total expenses. So they would be applying to us for the other 50% if they could show.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. So in the application, in the budget, we very clearly say that you can only ask 50% of your project, and then that was usually the funding. We look at that, whether or not we fund that at 100%, at the 50% of your project.
Right. So we're not changing that aspect of the policy, and it's not changed on your red line version. I just wanted to make, to clarify that.
Thank you.
And so we currently have two different kinds of funding that we offer, which is the $30,000 from the Community Grants Program and the $50,000 from the Economic Development Reserve. And that's available this year, but that could change after this fiscal year. That could change, right?
Right. So the Community Initiative Grant, that gets put in Council's budget each budget cycle.
Right.
So next budget cycle, which is 2019, it could change. Right now it's 30,000. For the economic development, we got approval for 2017 and 2018 for 50,000. So in 2019, we'll have to request approval if that's still a successful program.
Okay, so that might change. That's the part that might change in 2019.
That's right.
And right now there's $47,400 in that available for 2018?
That's right. So Rogers Hometown Hockey dipped into that for a little bit.
Okay. Councillor Seeley?
Ms. Brown, thank you for all the changes to this being on the committee. I know how challenging it is. And in here we talk about one-time funding and encourage requests to be new. What would be an example of something that would be considered when they've received funding before?
So what we're looking for is, one of the things that we struggled with is organizations were starting to use this as operational or sustainable funding. So we would see that they would have an annual event, and every year we were getting a very similar request. So what we're looking for is not that those organizations can't apply, but it has to be for a new project, doing something new within the community. So that's the one-time funding piece of that.
Great, thanks.
Do we have any idea what would happen to this particular pool of funding in the event that it wasn't all allocated? Because the criteria are it's fairly strict. So what would happen to anything that wasn't allocated?
And it happens in the past, actually, that we haven't allocated the whole 30,000 for the community initiative, and that just goes back to the municipality as surplus. For the economic development reserve, it just doesn't get removed from the reserve.
Okay, so it just stays in that reserve, and it's like when we have when we have extra funds at the end of the year, it just stays in the municipal coffers. So
that's right.
If it's not allocated on your point system, then it's not drawn, essentially.
Exactly.
Correct?
That's
okay.
right.
Anybody else have any questions for Ms. Brown? I don't see any more questions, so thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And with that, I would like to move that Council approve the Community Grant Policy CSD-001 as amended. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Councillor McCallum?
I'll be happy to support this. It's a policy that keeps coming back to council to be tweaked and tweaked. So we're still looking to find our proper footing with this policy, but I'd rather see it change and evolve than stay stagnant. So I appreciate administration bringing it forward for changes. Thank you.
Yes, I too will support the policy changes. I know that it has gone through a number of iterations in the last 5 years, and we've had some infusion of funding for the last 2 years through the Economic Development Reserve, but that's likely to change at some point. So I think it's a good time to reevaluate and to determine, you're the one seeing the applications, so I think you have a sense of where the criteria, what direction it needs to go, and if this is going to meet those objectives better, I will be happy to support it. Thank you. Anyone else? I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. And moving on to Family and Community Support Services carryover. Item G3. And
I'm not sure whether I want my glasses.
I have Ms. Brown as the presenter, but I think it's
going to be Ms. Gilchrist.
Ms. Gilchrist. And I was going to call you Ms. Tara, because that's who I know you as, but thank you for clarifying that. So Ms. Gilchrist, you can do the presentation on Family and Community Support Services carryover for us.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Council, for the time this evening. I'm here tonight to ask you to join the province in approving a carryover of 2017 FCSS budget into 2018 for an FTE position from April 16th through to December 31st. So the province doesn't always agree to carry over. We had to do a special request to them, which I did first to find out if they were happy for us to keep their portion of the funding, which is $40,207, and the municipal portion is $10,052 for a total carryover of $50,259. That carryover has been created for over a number of years, ebbs and flows, with a series of factors that just ended up with position vacancies, increases from the province that were back paid, and then we had a whole bunch of money in 1 year, and trying to figure out how to utilize it without creating continued operations into other years where we didn't have that back payments and those kind of things. And so as a result, we're at this position now in 2018 with this $50,000. And we have a number of factors really aligning for this to be an opportunity for us, all sort of at the same time. So the province, I proposed some projects to them saying, this is what I'd like to do with this FTE. And they said, ooh, that's over our normal carryover, but we'll let you do it this year, but get it spent in 2018. And at the same time, I have a person returning from mat leave in the middle of April, and an employee who's already started on one of the projects in the Cannabis, who is able and willing to stay on with the FCSS department through till the end of 2018. And the projects that we're proposing for her to complete during that sort of 8.5-month period are all projects that will inform the community, will inform the municipality, will build capacity in other agencies for us moving forward without any increased operational FTE requirements into 2019. So the projects include Let's Talk Cannabis, which is something happening in 2018. We have some Health Canada funding in there, and that involves community conversations about how are we going to live together with our neighbors with different views on cannabis, with the use of it blowing into our backyards, or all of those sorts of things, and inviting people to dispel some myths from a health perspective and to have these community conversations. And then the FCSS department has agreed to follow that up with a sort of community development model with other social agencies to say, now with what we've learned, what is the responsibilities of the various organizations going forward, of which FCSS will likely have a very small role because we aren't in the business of cannabis education, addictions, any of the fallout that might happen, but we are certainly in the business of building that community and try to do the prevention pieces through various projects of making sure that we have healthy, strong neighborhoods. So that's one of the projects. One of the other projects is the AUMA's Welcoming and Inclusive Communities has something called an measuring inclusion tool. And that's developed for municipalities specific to essentially benchmark and assess where we are in terms of diversity, primarily as an organization. So there's 11 municipal factors that are specifically related to this organization, and then 4 community factors, of which, again, that will give us a template of where we're at. It might be that people need to look internally from a planning perspective to a land use perspective to an HR perspective on how we do things to make sure that we're doing things and encouraging diversity and participation. But it's not a new project that's going to cause a sort of an operational FTE need through 2019. And our final project that we'd like to get completed with this FTE position involves a switch of Roots of Empathy program. It's a program that is very, very time consuming. It was very successful for a number of years, and we've got some teachers fairly committed to it. But what we're finding is that the cost, time cost and financial cost, that it's been waning over the years, and that we need to relook at how can we reach those same outcomes for our kids and our families and our teachers with a program that we can design once we understand those outcomes that is less onerous in our resources. So in fact, it may end up saving us time and resources through 2018 or 19 and onward, but we need some dedicated time in order to dig into that project and really create a new curriculum and a new program going forward. So that's what we plan on doing. My ask is that you join the province in their approval of this 50,259. And do you have any questions?
I have a question for you regarding the Cannabis Let's Talk.
Yes.
Which is one of the proposed uses of that funding. Given that we had first reading on the land use changes tonight, and we're having a public hearing on April 10th, I don't imagine that you'll be able to do very much in this regard prior to that.
Correct. And so Jane, who is the person in FCSS working on the Cannabis Let's Talk, is involved with Robin and Richard from a municipal perspective of how do these things marry together and how do we work together in terms of public engagement. They're quite different processes, but they're certainly, she's actively involved in the internal administration committee and receiving support that way. It's a different conversation a little bit. It's not so much about here's what we're doing and those kind of things. It's more about people's attitudes and connectivity, and hopefully it will really marry into a lot of the projects and the work that Robin has also been doing on the civility project in terms of us talking about how can we disagree and still live peacefully and nicely together in our neighborhoods and community. Yeah.
Well, ultimately the cannabis legislation is coming down. We're going to have to deal with it. It's not likely to be in place before July 1st, obviously. Correct. And probably past that. So the Cannabis Let's Talk
We've got the grant now.
Okay.
We're receiving facilitator training for people from the Vaughan Valley or from Canmore are going on Friday to get that sort of technical pieces of what myths they'd like us to dispel and messages, and then some tips for people who aren't used to facilitating public engagement. The proposal we put forward was 3 targeted conversations, so our young adult population, our seniors population, and an immigrant population, and then 1 large public, everyone's invited, larger process, World Cafe conversation. And so those are planned for late spring, prior to whenever the launch of the actual legalization ends up. Last I'd heard they thought it might be as late as October.
So I guess that's what I'm trying to determine, is that all the input and all the discussion and the feedback that you're getting from the groups can still be used as we go along the process. I mean, we can make
Yes.
land use changes, we
Yes.
can make community conversations. I think Ms. Denage wants to speak.
Yes, thank you. I really just want to clarify that the Cannabis Let's Talk Alberta and those community conversations are not part of public engagement. And so just to clarify, we're doing our public engagement where we are getting feedback from the community to inform any changes to our bylaws or any proposed new bylaws we might need to create. That is the public engagement that we'll be leading, and these are community conversations, and we're making it really clear when we go out and advertise these community conversations to the community that it is not about giving the town of Canmore feedback to inform any changes. This is just about facilitating conversations with your neighbors and perhaps even learning
And it's got a
some
health
information.
slant to some degree, and some of those myths we have around cannabis, and really wanting to have conversations of it not being about whether you agree with the legalization or not, but it's here, and how do we be respectful and kind to each other, regardless of what the decisions are in the land use that happen. All of those things, it's coming, it's going to happen. How do we talk about how we live together with opposing views surrounding it, with accurate information from a health perspective?
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to speak or have questions for Ms. Gilchrist? Councillor Comfort?
I will support this request because I know what good work this department does. Whenever I'm feeling particularly low, I go in there and say, tell me what you're doing for the community today. And they tell me, and I go away feeling inspired. So I would always support
We're
their
still
asks.
questioning Ms. Gilchrist. Do you have any questions?
Oh, question? Question. No, really, no.
You can-
Oh, yes, about that. So the money that's coming from the province,
It came already.
you've got it.
We've got it and yours right now.
Okay. So
Yes.
if we said no to this,
Yes,
would you get to keep the provincial money?
no.
Oh,
So if you said no, the 40,000 goes back to the province, and the 10,000 goes back into the town of Canmore general revenue coffers.
that's what I had thought from the documents provided, and that would seem silly to me, but that's just me. Thank you for confirming that.
Thanks.
Anybody else have questions for Ms. Gilchrist? No, thank you so much for your presentation. And with that, I'll call the question. Sorry, I'll put the motion on the floor that council approve the carryover of $50,259 of 2017 surplus funding into the Family and Community Support Services, which is FCSS, 2018 budget to support community social development priorities as outlined in the report. Does anybody have some discussion or conversation about that? Perhaps? Councillor Comfort, you could tell us what you really think.
Sure, I would really support that. These initiatives are important to our community. This department has the pulse of the community and what the community needs, and they do a huge amount with very little in terms of resources and money. So I will be happy to support this motion. Okay.
Any other discussion on the motion? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. He's always checking to see if there's somebody on the...
I'll make sure to use their full name just for that. So that you say the wrong name.
So now we have a presentation regarding the RCMP clerk position change, and that's item G2 on the agenda. I believe Ms. DeSoto is going to speak in Ms. Cottle's absence today.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Sanford. And the very first thing I'd like to do is change the recommendation that is before you to the one on the screen. The intent and purpose are the same, however, it's just a slightly different approach. So the new motion is that council approve the conversion of the part-time RCMP clerk position from 4 days per week to full-time or 5 days per week, with the $20,000 in additional expenditure to be funded from the department's salary slippage. So, and just to speak to that, the intent of that motion is to make it clear that this will make that position full-time in perpetuity. So you're changing the position from a part-time to a full-time position for this year and for the foreseeable future, unless there's a change in staffing. We have 2 full-time positions and 1 part-time position. That part-time position was increased from 3 days per week to 4 days per week in the 2017-2018 budget process. Through 2017, we've had 2 people in that position, or have made offers to 2 people for that position. 1 person took it for a very short period of time until they were successful in obtaining full-time work elsewhere. Then we recruited and trained and did a bunch of work to get a second person on, and before they could come on, they found other full-time work related to that RCMP clerk position. So these are working right in the RCMP detachment. However, they are Town of Canmore municipal staff, so they are funded and hired through the Town of Canmore. We believe that the workload is there to support the full-time position. There is, because we have not had anybody in that position and we are still recruiting to bring that position on, there's sufficient slippage or unspent salary, wages and benefits within that budget to support the additional $20,000 this year. And that additional $20,000 provides for the salary and benefits to make for that additional day. It should be noted that as a 4-day per week employee, the part-time employee was not eligible for benefits. So the full cost of the benefit program is added in as part of that $20,000. I think that's pretty much the gist of what needs to be explained, and the motion that is requested for you to consider is there, and I'm happy to answer any questions should you have any.
So I guess my first question would be, when you're referring to the department salary slippage, is that, which department is that?
The
now?
RCMP, the police,
Okay.
the policing budget.
And that's our municipal employee that works?
So there is an RCMP budget within the budget you approve.
Mm-hmm.
A large chunk of that budget is contracted services, and that's what we contract to the RCMP. We also provide salaries and wages and benefits for the currently 2 full-time FTE and 1 part-time FTE. Yes.
And so we can fund that position in perpetuity from salary slippage?
By passing this motion, this will become a full-time position for 2019 and 2020. It'll become a full-time position.
So for this year, we're funding it from slippage, and then in the future it will budget.
In the future, it will be part of our budget, yes.
Okay.
Of course, council always has the prerogative at a future date to change the position funding back to part-time if that be the desire.
So that's where we're getting the money from slippage this year, but then we're going to budget for it in future years.
Yes, and when the intent is to hire a full-time person that will then stay on for a number of years. So we didn't want to be in the position of having to reduce them back to 4 days per week in 2019.
Okay. So this just informs us of where we're getting the money for it this year before we budget for it.
And it makes it clear that the position, it's the position approval that we're looking for.
Okay, I think I understand it now. Anybody else have questions for Mr. Soto? Councillor Comfort?
This being retired, I got all kinds of time to spend on the agenda. So my question is, it says that the increased costs of this position in the future are expected to be covered by an increase in fee revenue. Do you know which fees would be increased?
Well, the fees that, it's essentially fines.
Okay.
Sorry, I should clarify that. Much of what the admin people do are the vulnerable sector checks and some of the criminal records checks, etc. And some of those are fee driven.
Right.
I believe they're done for free if they're for not-for-profits, but, you know, there are a lot of companies, et cetera, that require these checks, and there is a processing fee associated with them. So that could potentially be the fee that they're referring to, but I'm sorry, I'm not completely certain on that one.
Somebody else isn't either. So the fee, that's the fees that they're referring to, though, not fines, right?
Yes, and again, if memory serves correct, the fee schedule was amended last year to increase the fees for these checks with the intent of funding the additional 1 day of staff salary. Without having checked today, I'm not certain if those fees are shown to be sufficient to fund the full.
That's okay. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Ms. DeSoto? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
So with that, I will call the question. Not the question, sorry. We'll put the motion on the floor first before we have the discussion. Council approved the conversion of the part-time RCMP clerk position from 4 days a week to full-time or 5 days per week, with the $20,000 in additional expenditure to be funded from the department's salary slippage. Discussion on that motion. Councillor Seeley.
I'll support this. It sounds like we do have a full-time position. It can be satisfied by the workload. We have a hiring and retention issue for the position, and the fees in the future should offset that position. So I will support this.
And just to clarify, we control the fees. We set the fee amounts. It's our master fee schedule. Is that part of it? Okay. I think I would be inclined to support this motion if we're seeing the workload. Those vulnerable sector checks, I know, need to be done in a timely manner, and I think it's useful for us to put some resources behind that if we see that it's a need. So I would support it. Anybody else speak to the motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. And that brings to a conclusion a night of power failures. And I'd like to call this meeting adjourned at 8 p.m. Thank you. Those in favor? And no one's opposed. Thank you. He's getting through it.